But first, we need to start with the biggest news story of the day. I don't know if you guys have been following the news, but finally, an oppressed, downtrodden group of South Africans were saved this weekend. This poor group of people has spent years in suffering, driven out of South African society, isolated in the cities, the towns, on the farms. They've been mocked, they've been belittled, derided, and recently they've been begging to be saved. They've been asking anybody who will listen to pull them out of their awful situation. And finally, this past weekend, they were freed from their chains and lifted out of the hell that has been their lives. I am talking, of course, about Kaizer Chiefs. Y'all thought I was talking about the Afrikaner refugees, though. Yes, Kaizer Chiefs finally won a cup on Saturday, their first in 10 years, and I, as a lifelong Buccaneer, would like to take this moment to congratulate Orlando Pirates. Thank you. Hear me out. Thank you. Hear me out. Thank you, Pirates, for giving Chiefs the Nedbank Cup this weekend, because we know that South Africa needs a competitive Soweto derby, guys. We know the country needs some kind of thrill and excitement. We can't just win all the cups, guys. It's selfish. And Chiefs were on life support. We needed to bring them back. We needed Chiefs to feel something again. We needed to be selfless and generous and kind. And on Saturday, we did the right thing. We gave Chiefs something to live for. Pirates have won 5 trophies in the last 3 years. We could afford to give Chiefs 1 in 10. Remember, as they say in church, charity starts at home. Back to the main big news story of the weekend. The first plane of Afrikaner refugees left for America on a chartered plane last night. Only 49 Amerikaners boarded the flight. Now, that sounds like a little, right? After all of that noise, only 49 people. They only got 49 out of all the alleged refugees in South Africa. But remember, South Africa, 3 years ago on a podcast, Charlie's Theron did say that only 44 people speak Afrikaans. So, yeah, that really happened. So actually, 49 is great. They found 5 more, guys. That's an 11% increase in the Afrikaner population in 3 years. That's an explosion. They have been hooking up. Well done to them. Now, obviously, this is actually a very serious moment. We are about to face a week of absolute nonsense from Trump's MAGA America about how these Amerikaner refugees are in so much trouble, and of course, massive backlash from Americans asking how some white people got refugee status in America, but not many millions of black and brown actual refugees from around the world. But these lying, deluded Amerikaners are not the only South Africans who are currently talking a lot about race and transformation. The DA took the government to court over the amendments to the Employment Equity Act last week, which they say are unconstitutional because it enables discrimination against certain races. Last week, the DA's Sith Lord, Helen Zille, also said that jobs should be awarded based on merit, not race. Political parties are proposing alternatives to Black economic empowerment, BEE policy, and the fight over what is transformation to redress past injustices and what is unfair discrimination now is getting louder and louder. And it's getting to the point where, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to feel like we're losing our grip on reality a little bit. Honestly, I know a lot of people don't take history to matric. I know a lot of people were in high school under apartheid. I know a lot of people don't want anyone to know what really happened before 1994. But we cannot seriously be getting to the point where white people are feeling like they're genuinely being oppressed, forced out of jobs and wealth, and being driven down by government policy. So now we're going to get a grip. And we're going to have a reality check. We're going to talk about white economic empowerment. Because although it wasn't officially called that, like BEE, that's what apartheid was. And colonialism before that. It was a system built to advantage white people and exploit black people. It was designed to create wealth for white people and keep black people from gaining wealth. It was a system that transferred what little money black people earned into the hands of white people. And it was incredibly successful. And it went so much further than any current government policies do, no matter what the the right-wing politicians are saying to you. It created the most unequal society on earth, where the vast majority of white people remain blessed beyond the wildest dreams of the majority of black South Africans. So tonight, if you'll forgive me, we're going to remind or maybe teach many South Africans for the first time what really happened during apartheid and before. Now, we could start basically any time from the moment Jan van Riebeeck arrived in 1652 and the hundreds of years of colonialism full of violence, dispossession, and exploitation. But for the purposes of properly understanding modern South Africa, we're going to look at government policies and programs from the moment South Africa as a country came into existence. So we can compare laws and programs through time and how they affected everyone in what is now a truly democratic South Africa. Let's start in 1910. It's just 15 years ago, when the Union of South Africa was formed. Literally, the country was invented, it came into existence for the first time, and government policy affected everybody in the whole country for the first time. The Second South African War, also known as the Anglo-Boer War, had just ended. It was a war between the British and the Boers, and the British won. Now, the British wanted to unite all white people together with them to rule a brand new country. They couldn't do it on their own. They needed all of the whites, especially the Afrikaners, who they had been fighting in and killing for years. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but some of the first concentration camps in the whole world were in the Free State now. It was British holding Afrikaners and others in captivity. So the first thing the British did was they ruled that only white people could vote in this new country. Instantly unite all the white people, only they could vote, only they could have a say in the making of a new country. Just 3 years later, in 1913, they made it illegal, impossible for black people to own land outside of very small reserves. That meant that instantly 93% of all land in South Africa could only be owned by white people. Just 21% of the population at the time. Millions of black South Africans across the country were forced off their land. People of color were forced out of their homes for the next 70 years, from 1913 through the forced removals of communities like District 6 and Sophiatown. To go back, then in the early 1920s, poor white Afrikaners protested that most big industries were dominated by British companies. And those companies were hiring skilled black workers over poor, unskilled Afrikaners. So in response, the government funded enormous public works projects, like building the Hartbeespoort Dam, and they only hired poor white workers. Then in 1925, the Wage Act made a minimum wage, but for only white workers, not black workers, meaning that black workers could still be radically exploited. And the government also created incentives for companies applying for tenders. The more white workers you employ, the more likely you were to get the tender. So all this was already happening before apartheid even started. And then in 1948, the National Party took power and formalized apartheid for the very first time. Immediately, they began directing massive tax funding to social programs and welfare grants for poor white people, and they slashed funding for similar programs that were meant for black people. The NPA worked for decades to lift white people out of poverty, to get them good educations and good jobs. They provided electricity and plumbing and water and healthcare to white people while doing nothing of the sort for black South Africans. And the NPA worked incredibly hard to promote white, specifically Afrikaner-owned businesses by providing government funding, tenders, incentives, and other opportunities to such companies. Many of South Africa's biggest, most famous companies today that you all know so well were created and grown by the apartheid government's support. That's how they got big. Also, during apartheid in 1950, the Group Areas Act stopped black people from moving through South Africa freely. They had to get permission to go places, always on white people's terms. And this obviously made it incredibly hard to find work, or live near places of work, or access basic services like electricity, plumbing, waste removal, healthcare, and more. This was just 80 years ago, guys. From 1953, the Bantu Education Act literally made it the law that black people could only be taught to do basic unskilled labor, to be laborers on mines or on construction sites, or to be maids in white people's houses. They were limited by that education system to only have a skill set to do menial service labor for white South Africans. Also in the 1950s and in the 1960s, the apartheid government froze black people's pensions in place, which meant that as inflation increased, the value of black people's pensions shrank. Now, all I've just said, and there was so much of it, is only a handful of the many things the apartheid government did to engineer white South African prosperity and keep black South Africans poor, uneducated, and easy to exploit. All of this economic engineering created modern democratic South Africa. And I actually don't think many of us truly understand how well white economic empowerment worked. Just after the end of apartheid in 1996, the first official census of black South Africa took place. This was 29 years ago, acknowledging and properly accounting for the lived experiences of black South Africans for the first time in history. This was 29 years ago. It found out that 20%, 1 in 5 black South African households was informal housing, like shacks in people's backyards or on open land. That's around 6 million black South Africans living in shackland dwellings. You know how many white South Africans lived in informal housing in 1996? 4,000, relative to 6 million. In 1996, more than 7 million black South Africans had no access to piped water. Just 130,000 white South Africans didn't have piped water. And in 1996, more than 17 million black South Africans didn't have electricity. Just 17,000 white South Africans didn't have electricity. This was now, people, I was alive when this was the case. Now, don't shame me, I'm only 31, but I was alive when this was the case. And now we're in 2025. Many things have improved since 1996 for many black South Africans. But due to recent decades of ANC government incompetence and criminal corruption, there's a whole lot of work that has not yet been done. But to be honest, even a perfect government would have taken far longer than 30 years to undo the damage that the Union and Apartheid governments did. And none of our modern policies violate people's rights the way the Land Act, or the Group Areas Act, or the Bantu Education Act, or all those economic policies did. All white South Africans benefited from 84 years of those evil laws and were blessed by those white economic empowerment programs. That's why the vast majority of white South Africans are still the wealthiest and the vast majority of black South Africans are still the poorest. Sure, modern transformation policies do try to give opportunities to people of color and women and disabled people to try and redress centuries of unfair, unjust policies. And you know what? Even with those policies, the vast majority of white South Africans are still wealthier than the vast majority of black South Africans could ever dream of being in their lifetimes, because transformation policies now don't violate people's rights, and that means that they take much longer. This last weekend, a report found that black South Africans accounted for 15% of skilled jobs in 1994, and in 2014, only 18%. In 20 years of freedom, only 3% more skilled jobs were going to black South Africans. And in corporate South Africa, white South Africans hold 62% of the management roles, despite white, 62% Karens, guys, despite white people only being 7.7% of the working age population. Black South Africans only hold 17% of the management roles in this country, and that's with transformation policies. That's with BEE incentives. Imagine if those policies hadn't existed, how little change would have happened in the last 30 years or so. Now, we all know the Afrikaner refugees are absurd. We all know that. But for Helen Zille and the likes to be saying we need to give jobs based on merit, not race, is ridiculous. Firstly, with transformation policies, you still have to be qualified to do the job before your race, gender, and physical status is considered. The policies don't give people jobs who aren't qualified to do them just because they're black or a woman or disabled. But secondly, many black South Africans were raised during apartheid, denied all those opportunities, services, and quality of life that white South Africans were given. They deserve to have what they have overcome recognized. They deserve a fair shot and a level playing field. And so do their children. Many young black South Africans seeking work now grew up in poor homes just after apartheid, without opportunities or services or family wealth. Many young black South Africans were the first in their families to go to university. They deserve a fair shot at employment, even when competing with white South Africans who did get all those advantages, all the extra blessings, all the family wealth, and all the personal networks through which many people get jobs. So let's get a grip, shall we? We are trying to make South Africa a fairer, more inclusive, just place. We are trying to transform it from the unjust, unequal hellscape for many that it was just 31 years ago. And all of this frenzied whining about how hard the government is apparently making life for white South Africans, that ignores reality, it ignores history, and it divides us. It divides us. And I think we need to make a concerted effort as South African society to tell these idiots to just shut up or catch a flight to America, because they can do that now. Because let's be honest, when all those Americans got on that flight this morning, you know what we all said? It's like Dub on SABC2, bye-bye, 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 tot ziens and that might not get on TV.